So I got this fantastic question the other day from one of you, and you wanted to know what the situation is with the bus that runs between Walt Disney World and Universal. And I know what some of you are thinking, hold on a second, there's a bus that runs between Walt Disney World and Universal? Yeah, there is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Also, this person wanted to know if there was bus transportation from the Universal Walt Disney World area to Busch Gardens. And I've got an answer for that as well. So get comfortable. We're just hanging out in a parking lot today, which it looks like I just stopped in the middle of the street because of the stop sign right there. But no, we're in a parking lot. I just kind of pulled off so I could chat with you. And yeah, so get comfortable, grab a drink, and let's dig into this one. So first and foremost, I want to start off by saying there are a lot of different ways to get around here in Florida. There are a lot of different ways to get around no matter where we're talking about, right? Like public transportation does exist in many parts of the country. It's not always the best here in the United States compared to elsewhere, but Florida does have a lot of public transportation available. It's not going to get you to every single corner of Florida or every single corner of town like you might find in some other countries or even in some other states, but it'll still do the job, especially in a pinch, especially if you're looking for a more affordable way to get around. There, of course, are some pros and cons. There are always going to be some things that you need to take into consideration and some things that you need to know. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in a second, but let's get into answering this question. What's the situation with the bus that runs between Universal and Walt Disney World, more specifically Epic Universe and Disney Springs? So here in this area, in the greater Orlando area, we have bus transportation, public bus transportation operated by a company called Lynx. It operates much like bus transportation in any other major city. There is a fare, there's a schedule, there's like a map that can be very confusing if you've never used public transportation before. But the long and short of it is you can absolutely get from Epic Universe to the Walt Disney World Resort, more specifically Disney Springs, using this public transportation. Based on the basics, the stuff that I looked up in summer of 2025, it's about $2 per person one way, and the trip from Epic Universe to Disney Springs is going to take you about 50 minutes. Now, that doesn't necessarily account for traffic, so that may cause some delays if you decide to go this route, but delays are going to be there no matter if you're driving or taking public transit. And for those of you who are thinking, hold on a second, 50 minutes seems like a really long time, you're not wrong. The trip between Universal and Walt Disney World is about 15 to 25 minutes, give or take. Of course, traffic can cause delays when you're driving yourself or using a rideshare as well, so that's important to take into consideration. But the long and short of it is, yeah, when you're taking the bus, it's going to take you a lot longer to get where you're going, which is pretty standard when we're talking about using public transit, when we're talking about using the bus, no matter where you are. And as someone who is pretty familiar with using public transit, I can tell you that as much as 50 minutes seems like a long time, it could be a lot worse. I've seen much shorter routes take much, much longer. So, it's not too bad. Now, in terms of how easy this ride will be, I think that that's the exact way that this person phrased their question. It really depends on any number of factors. Public transportation, it's one of those tricky things that can be a nightmare, but also can be a piece of cake depending on how familiar you are with using public transportation. Maps can be like reading a foreign language if you've never used a public transportation map before, and if you're not familiar with the routes, that can also be a nightmare for some people. Of course, if you're someone who uses public transportation all the time, you might be chuckling at this and be like, well, hold on a second, it's not that big a deal. This map isn't as confusing as there or over here. And that's true. But, everyone has a different level of understanding, and everyone, they got different things that they're familiar with and different things that they might not be familiar with. So I hesitate to say like it's easy or, it'll go smooth, because you just don't know. It may, but also it very well may not. Now, if you're someone who's never used public transportation before and you're thinking about this as an option, I do think that it's important to go on the Lynx website and really study that map. Take a look at what that looks like and, give yourself an idea of what you're in for. This is an option that you're thinking about going with. I will say anytime I'm planning a trip to any place where there's going to be public transportation involved in my travel plans, I always make sure that I go the route of kind of building an itinerary, a plan of exactly what my schedule for that day is going to look like. What time do I need to leave my hotel to get to what station? What train or bus am I keeping an eye out for? All of that is something that I would kind of make like a paper brain or a cheat sheet for, that I can have with me, even just, putting it on my phone so I can reference back. That can make things go a lot smoother, even though you still might find yourself getting a little hung up here and there or running into some things that are a little bit confusing, but still it can be helpful. It's a place to start, and then you can ask questions and whatever along the way. Now, another thing to keep in mind if you're thinking about going this route, like using public transportation between Disney and Universal, is that you're going to have to leave the Disney or Universal bubble. You're going to be stopping along the way, and some of the places where you might find yourself stopping are likely to be less than magical. Now, full disclosure, I do not know all the stops along the route between these two places. I haven't specifically visited them. I haven't taken this route myself before, but these are just the facts of the matter. This area outside of Universal, outside of Disney, outside of the bubbles that both of these places kind of create, they can get a little rough and sometimes a little bit sketchy. And just like with everything else, the way that you feel about this is going to vary greatly depending on like your experience, where you're from, places you've been. There are people who have been in some places, they live in some places that are pretty rough. I've lived in some pretty rough places myself. And so when you experience what you might be experiencing down here, you're like, oh, that's no big deal, right? Like, why would you even mention that? But there are also people from other places, I've lived in some of those places as well, where this is going to seem like the most dangerous, the most sketchy place that they've ever been. And so it's important to recognize that, if you think about going this route, especially if you're going to be traveling with your family, especially if you're trying to save some money. There are other ways to make this trek that can still be affordable, but can give you a little bit more peace of mind. So just think about where your limits are, the things that you may or may not want to encounter, situations you may or may not want to put yourself in, and use that as a guide to decide if this is right for you and if it's worth the savings. Now, like I said a minute ago, I haven't personally done this route. I don't need to. And honestly, sitting on a bus for an hour when I don't have to be sitting on a bus for an hour, it's just not really my cup of tea, But I have heard great things about this option, and with public transportation, no matter where we're talking about, sometimes the price is right, and though it takes a little bit longer, it's worth the savings for some. So, I would consider it. Why not? But look, we also have to talk about Busch Gardens because, believe it or not, you can use bus transportation and shuttles to get out that way. I know, actually, this one took me by surprise. So Busch Gardens is another theme park in the Central Florida area. It's described as Central Florida, but it's not in the Orlando area. It's about an hour and a half away from where we are right now, give or take, depending on traffic. And while most people think about driving themselves out to Busch Gardens because it is so far away, there are other options if you want to make your way out there. First, we have to talk about the shuttles. Busch Gardens offers shuttles from the Orlando area, various places around the Orlando area, to Busch Gardens daily, operated by Mears. If you have a certain type of ticket, it's free, which is fantastic. And quite frankly, something that I definitely think that you should take a look at, especially if you're trying to save a little bit of money. Maybe you're not necessarily comfortable with driving out that way. This could be a great option for you and your family. Information is available on the Busch Gardens website. I'll have a link in the description down below if you want to read more. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that they do recommend that you make reservations. It's a little bit of an extra step, but definitely worth it, especially if you're looking to save some cash. But there's also another option, and that is to take public transportation out to Busch Gardens. And look, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that I don't think that this is going to be worth it, mainly because of how long it takes to get out there and honestly how difficult it is to get out there. So the long and short of it is, yeah, you definitely can take bus transportation out there, public transportation. It's probably more affordable than, well, certainly not more affordable than taking the free shuttle, but definitely more affordable than going the route of renting a car. more likely than not. The challenge with this, though, is just how complex it is. And while, again, it's going to depend on how familiar you are with public transit, I'm not going to try and sugarcoat this and tell you that it's not going to be a lot of work. You have to take public transportation from wherever it is that you're starting to a point where you're going to have to change from Lynx to another carrier, and then from there you're going to have to take that bus transit to another location. Like, you're crossing over a lot of counties, you're covering a lot of distance, you're going to have to do some walking as well, going to have to make sure that the schedules are just right so that you can make the connections. All in all, if you go this route, it's going to take like 4 to 6 hours to get out to Busch Gardens, as opposed to an hour and a half, of course, give or take, based on traffic. Now, for me, even though this might be a big savings, I do not think that this is the worthwhile route to go. Mainly because it's a lot of stress. And it's basically an entire day of travel. And while it's a concept that not everyone has fully familiarized themselves with, some people struggle to grasp this concept, which I get, But time is money. Again, different people are going to feel differently about this, but this is just my personal opinion. And especially when we talk about vacationing in a place where it's hot, in a place where there is a lot of traffic, and you might find yourself like in a position you just don't want to be in with your kids, or in the heat, like waiting extra time for a bus because there was some traffic in the first route, and then blah, 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 blah. Like, that doesn't sound like fun to me. Even if I am saving a little bit of money, I'd rather spend the extra on a rental car. I know that that's going to be a sore subject, because every time we talk about like spending a little bit of extra money to save a little bit of stress, different people have a different view of that type of thing. But this is one of those that I'm like, yeah, I definitely wouldn't go this route, at least in my opinion. But it is an available route. It's something that you can do. Of course, just like we talked about before with getting between Universal and Walt Disney World, taking the time to look up everything you need to know about these routes, the schedules, putting a plan together, have that written out. That's all going to be super important if you decide to go this route and you want to eliminate as much stress as possible and keep this as smooth as possible. I also recommend taking a look and seeing if there are apps that will help you out. You're basically doing anything that will familiarize yourself with this and make it easier for you to make this trek. I think you should go that route. Do it. It really is worth it in the end. And also make sure that you're taking the time to put a backup plan. This is why I always say that having an itinerary or paper brain or whatever it is that you want to call it is so important, because if you happen to miss a connection or miss a bus or whatever the case may be, you at least know what's next and you don't find yourself scrambling last minute, But yeah, so that's everything that I have for you today when it comes to using public transportation, the buses to get between Universal, Walt Disney World, and even Busch Gardens. Like I always say, this isn't necessarily going to be right for everybody, but it might be right for you. One way or another, it's another option. And now you're aware of it. So who knows? Maybe this is going to be exactly what you were looking for, or maybe not. Of course, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Is this something that you would consider? Is this something that you've ever done? Share your experiences in the comments down below. Also, if you have any tips or tricks for using public transportation when you travel, whether it's here in Florida or anywhere else, we'd love to hear them, so pop them in a comment. Of course, if you have any other questions, let me know. Check the description box for links to information about Lynx, and of course that Busch Gardens info that I told you about as well. And yeah, have a great day wherever it is you are. See you guys soon. Bye.